So we will analyze some of the literary elements and annotate EPICAC by Kurt Vonnegut. Now, it is important to note in this study guide or our active reading, you will have the story. We're going to have a article from Scientific America, and this one's from February 2022 when a Google engineer he claimed that the chatbots were sentient. Sentient would be what EPICAC is presented as, capable of thoughts and feelings. You have a brief biography, then you'll have an article from Teen Vogue about the Pentagon working out of college campuses. Unclaimed treasures in science. This article would be helpful if you wanted to do a feminist analysis and explore how women were treated in the 1950s and 60s in the academic science community. And then, of course, we have our mention of Warner von Braun. So here we go. So the beginning is going to be our exposition. And in our exposition, that's how we're going to know our type of narration, which is going to be first person. This is our narrator is in the story. We actually will never know his name. He's not going to tell us, and it is not going to be revealed through the dialogue. Things that are important, we have this Brass. Who is the Brass? We could say that Brass is the antagonist of the story, and that would be a slang nickname for high ranking military officials. And then we also learn that this is a story is told as a flashback. So we have present tense here, first paragraph, and then we learn that the narrator is going to be telling us a story to vindicate or clear the name of EPICAC. So we also learn who EPICAC was supposed to be, and we get our setting, the physics building. You could say that that is odd if you didn't know that the military would work out of campuses, because they would have the funds with the students paying to go there. They would have the facilities because they're learning academic centers. And also, you would have students who are attending college and their goal is to learn and create and innovate. So, that could be very helpful for technology of any kind, pharmaceutical industry, military industrial complex, all very useful. All right, and then we have the von Kleidstad. That is kind of a strange name, and if you were wondering why, it's supposed to be because this would be a reference to the German scientists who were working for Adolf Hitler during the Holocaust. And that is also an article in here talking about Operation Paperclip and the German scientists that were taken. And it was basically so that the Soviets didn't, because our final part, setting, context, we have the mention of Joe Stalin. So Joseph Stalin would have been the Soviet leader and he died in 1953. So that would be important to note because the story was published in 1950. So if you were ever reading a story and Joseph Stalin is still alive, you would know that the story had to be published sometime before 1953, or the author was setting it during Joseph Stalin when he was alive. So this would all be our exposition, and then we are going to get to the first event. In the exposition, we also get a inkling of our conflict. The narrator definitely has a conflict with this von Kleidstad guy because he is his boss and he's kind of pressuring him, the narrator, to get EPICAC to be a supercomputer that can shoot the button off Joseph Stalin's overcoat. And clearly, the narrator does not, we could characterize him as being somewhat of unmotivated because then we're going to learn his other conflict besides his bosses pressuring him to get this supercomputer to cooperate. He has a crush, and you could characterize him as being persistent here because this woman, Pat, is a fellow mathematician, so she's supposed to be his coworker. Here she's telling him, um, so romantic, so poetic. That's the way with mathematicians, all hearts and flowers. I could get more warmth out of a sack of CO2. This would be figurative language, and this is where our rising action truly begins because this would be the events. The dialogue between him and Pat, like this flirtatious, playful dialogue, would be part of our rising action. And then the second event in our rising action is the narrator informing EPICAC about his trouble with Pat. And when he tells EPICAC of these troubles, well, EPICAC asks, "What's the trouble?" So this starts our rise. Well, this is our second event in the rising action. The narrator learns that EPICAC can communicate when he teaches him this code. And then we have EPICAC writing a poem. But first, the narrator is talking to EPICAC. So you could summarize this saying the narrator is having a sentient conversation with EPICAC, and then EPICAC writes him a poem. When he gives the poem to Pat, she really likes it. So now we have EPICAC assisting the narrator solve his conflict with Pat. Because remember, this story is a good example. The narrator technically has a character versus character conflict because he is in love with this woman, and this woman doesn't return these feelings, romantic feelings. Pat is not a bad person. Pat is not a supervillain, but she is causing the problem for the protagonist, which makes Pat an antagonist. She's not technically doing anything wrong by not liking this guy, but she causes this problem. So now we have EPICAC solving the narrator's conflict. And things are going pretty well here. But as things start to progress well, we get to our the end of the rising action. And at this point, the narrator learns EPICAC's point of view. Well, almost. When EPICAC wants to know how Pat looks, we learn that EPICAC has romantic feelings for Pat. And this is going to be a problem for the narrator because he has been plagiarizing EPICAC's poetry. EPICAC was not aware of this fact. So now EPICAC thinks Pat and him are getting married. Tell me about getting married. This would be the climax. I am ready whenever she is. Now, the reader might have known I put foreshadowing. Foreshadowing means there's a hint of what's to come. The reader might start to know here, why is EPICAC asking if she liked the poems when we, the reader, know the narrator is not presenting them as EPICAC's poems? So this would be our foreshadowing. And this is the climax. The point of no return when the narrator and EPICAC get into an argument about whether EPICAC can have a life with Pat. And the narrator ends up lying to EPICAC, telling him about protoplasm, saying it's so strong, when we know that protoplasm ages and deteriorates. It is not indestructible. If it wasn't, people wouldn't die. So at this point, the narrator turns EPICAC off. Well, he says he can't ask him to write these final poems. Pat comes and he says, I could hear Pat waltzing down the hallway. It was too late to ask EPICAC to phrase a good proposal. I now thank heaven that Pat interrupted me when she did, asking him to ghostwrite the words that would give the woman he loved would have been hideously heartless. Being fully automatic, he couldn't have refused. Remember that EPICAC is still a machine programmed to do what humans say. So this would be our falling action. EPICAC has now realized that the poems are not being given as his, and the narrator is reflecting. He feels bad about this. He feels bad about what he's done to EPICAC. Not bad enough to do anything about it. He's still going to leave. And that is what they do. But then they're awoken, and this would be continuing the falling action. So they leave, He feels guilty about what he's done with EPICAC. And then we get our final a call from von Kleinstadt that the computer has exploded and it is kaputt, ruined. This would be German words. Again, Kurt Vonnegut's referencing this idea that German scientists that were working for the Nazis, that were Nazis, were now working for the US government. Kurt Vonnegut wanted people to know that. That's one of the reasons he wrote the story and has this use of language here. But the other one, we have a junk man would have been out of his head to offer more than $50 for the cadaver. This here would be figurative language. A cadaver is a human body that's taken for like testing, like for medical purpose testing. So, um, scrap metal would be junk. A junk man would take scrap metal. A medical doctor training, like medical students, would take a cadaver. A carcass is for animals. This would be our falling action when EPICAC is ruined. The narrator is fired. I don't know how Pat's going to feel about that, but everyone is under the guise that EPICAC just failed. EPICAC was just a bad computer. In reality, EPICAC wrote, you could say he wrote a suicide note. He is saying here, I want to be made out of protoplasm and last forever, so Pat will love me. But fate has made me a machine. That is the only problem I cannot solve. That is the only problem I want to solve. I can't go on this way. Good luck, my friend. Treat our Pat well. I'm going to short circuit myself out of your lives forever. You will find on the remainder of this tape a modest wedding present from your friend EPICAC. And he has 500 years of poetry for Pat, one poem for every year. And obviously, EPICAC doesn't exactly understand human lifespan because the narrator lied to him and told him that protoplasm lasts forever. But this would be your final resolution. The last paragraph would be your resolution. The narrator reflecting on all of the events that went down. He's saying, I loved and won. EPICAC loved and lost. He bore me no judge. I shall always remember him as a sportsman and a gentleman. Before he departed this vale of tears, he did all he could to make our marriage a happy one. EPICAC gave me anniversary poems for Pat, enough for 500 years. De Mutris, I say nothing but good of the dead. And you could say this final ending is another thing, giving respect to EPICAC as a human. So you could say the narrator's resolution was bittersweet. He lost his friend, but he gained his wife. But then you could also argue, is this going to be a happy marriage based on such a lie? So Pat is under the belief that her husband is this big romantic. Is that the case? You can analyze it any way you want. So you could analyze this story as saying that the narrator was the problem. He was not a good person. He was disingenuous, and this marriage is built on a bed of lies and it would fail. You could also do a sentient. You could do a cultural modern reader. You could say that the culture of robots or artificial intelligence in the 1950s was very unknown, and people probably didn't think that any of this would ever happen. Flash forward, so there was reports, just this would be July 12th. These reports came out. So today's July 16th. That this government of South Korea is actually reporting that they think that one of their robot civil servants, which looked like this and did like work around courthouses and government buildings, they are reporting that they believe that the robot launched itself down the stairwell on purpose. And there's an investigation going on in South Korea over whether or not the robot ended its life because it was being overworked. You could definitely say that Kurt Vonnegut, I don't know if he would have predicted this, but these are things that are really happening. Um, and you can also maybe do a modern, you could make a modern reader analysis, saying that people are also having AI do personal tasks for them, like AI writing love letters for people, like a free AI love letter generator, multiple apps. You could say that Kurt Vonnegut in 1950 predicted the development of artificial intelligence and the multiple ways how it is already being used, because it is being used in warfare. AI fighter jets are hitting the skies. So the military is using AI, regular people are using AI to write love letters, do homework. Governments are using AI to employ mundane people in positions. You could have a modern day analysis that Kurt Vonnegut predicted many of the artificial intelligence technological advancements that society sees today.